All right, now I'm getting this quote right, and I got to read it right. This is from Errol Hawani. And he only likes it when I get his quotes right, but he's got Markel Martin on. Markel Martin says Francis Ngannou was asking the UFC for fights, but he was being stalled out. That's an expression. They put it in quotations. Also in quotations, he should have been done with his contract 2 years ago. Easily, end of quote. Now, let's take a look at that. Do you guys know who Markel is? I'm assuming that you do. Markel is a seemingly very nice guy. He's a very charming and handsome guy. I've never actually met him, so I'm just, this is what I gather. He's doing aerial. He used to work at the UFC, I think in accounting, but he used to work in the UFC. Left the UFC and works for CAA. CAA, huge talent agency, which happens to be a rival to WME, but I've never really seen a conflict come there. And Markel was representing Francis. Now, Markel and Francis have gone their separate ways, but I still want to talk about what Markel said. Because with as limited information as I have, I did observe a level of that. I just want to go back and remind you guys why it happened. I don't know that it would change your opinion, but I don't know that I'm trying to change your opinion. Markel said something that most people have overlooked. He said Francis wanted fights, but he was being stalled out. So he could have this contract done 2 years ago. Now, Francis got put in a really interesting position, which is Francis wanted to fight for the world championship. But the world champion was named Stipe Miocic, and they'd already fought once, and it was 5 rounds of nothing to see. It was a 5-round domination by Stipe. Now, Francis certainly did enough to start to claw and work his way back. Plus, he could chalk the first one up to jitters, and that's a very real thing, right? Sometimes you're just not ready. You don't believe it yourself. And the second that match gets there, oh my goodness, give me another chance. That's real. But the problem going was Stipe had started a program of business with Daniel Cormier, which ended up doing 3 matches. It just took a meaningful period of time. So you keep Francis busy, you get Francis in there, you let the Stipe DC thing go and move on. You start to get information that Jon Jones is coming up. Now, Rosenstruck was the opponent. It was UFC 246. And I was going to say over him, Francis Ngannou knocks him out. Now, beating Rosenstruck's a hard thing to do, but to knock out Rosenstruck, who had like a 27-3 professional kickboxing record, 29-2, was something really beautiful. Was a surprise, and it was impressive. So Dana goes to the post-fight press conference as a way of rewarding Francis. He did this to build Francis, and he did this to promote Francis. And he did this as a reward, which is Francis is the #1 contender. His next fight will be for the world championship, period. Now, Dana did this in light of the fact that he now is a #1 contender for a contest which still has to be figured out between Stipe and Daniel Cormier. That hadn't been done before. We did not establish who our #1 contender is with the title fight already signed and still looming. We had never done that before. But it was a way to reward and to recognize Francis. In addition to that, and just to remind you, when that press conference came around and Dana White sewed that up and put a button on it, the relevance to Dana doing that is the world thought Jon Jones was going to come up, take the opportunity away. And we've seen something similar to that happen many times in this sport, where you make a statement based on the information you have, and then something falls into your lap, and now you've got different information, so you've got to go make a different statement, right? Perfectly reasonable, but in this sport, we see it more often than sometimes we do in other industries. So Dana wanted to clear the air to let you know, as great as Jon is, and he's great, as special as Jon is, and he's special, as excited as we are for him to come up to the division, and we are excited, he is not going to step in front of Francis. Jon can go ahead and be #1 contender, but he will be #1 contender for the winner of Francis versus the winner of Stipe and Daniel, no matter how long that takes, and that's why Dana did it. It was meant to serve and recognize and reward. That was the intent. Now, how many times in life, right? We always, as people, want to be judged on our intent, but we judge other people on their actions, right? It's one of those things. So, Francis says, I want to fight. The byproduct of this recognition and reward by Dana. The byproduct was that Francis wait. And if you're a prize fighter who gets the prize is you fight, you could look at it and say, hey, I'm getting slowed down, not to mention Rosenstrike, and I was out of there pretty quick. And Francis could say that a few times. Francis got in there with the scariest fighter of all time, which is Cain Velasquez, and Francis was out of there pretty quick. I think he had 3 of these in a row. If I'm wrong, it was even 4. Does it go all the way back to Overeem? I feel like Overeem was a number of years ago, so I think something else came in there. Maybe Curtis Blades part 2, right? It's one of these things where he's fresh as the daisy. He wants to fight, but the schedule doesn't really call for that. It's like, hey, I get your situation, but I didn't know that. I didn't know you were going to come out fresh. In fact, you versus Rosenstrike, I would have predicted you 2 guys are going to go bludgeon each other and probably share in a hospital bed. That's what I would have predicted. And by the way, I've made plans. I'm 5 months ahead. That's the part I don't tell you, but I am. So when you say I'm ready to go in and I can look at you and see that you are, when I say, but I don't have anywhere to put you. And then if you're Dana and you're dealing with Francis specifically, there is a responsibility. And this is the part that gets missed so often. You cannot take somebody and just put him in there with Francis. You just can't. Francis will take the number 1 guy in the world, the number 1 contender, and he will send that guy to the emergency room. You got to put him in there with champions. You got to put him in there with the absolute best that you have. And I just bring that to you because Markel's point is not factually incorrect. It's not. The term stalled out is meant to be derogative. I wish that he would have left stalled out. But as far as Francis saying, hey, I want to get in there, go ahead and put me in there, it's not that easy. You have to find a willing opponent, okay? I mean, you got to have a venue and you got to have the money. You got to have all this stuff in the first place, but then you got to have a willing opponent. And then in Francis's spot, he's also got to be the top guy. So it looks as you were held out or you were held back. Was everybody doing as best as they can and working as fast as they could? There's certain guys. Mike Tyson comes to mind, but so does Francis Ngannou. Where there's more things and more people that have to agree than an ordinary situation. I don't have a problem with what Raquel said. I would just like to offer that amendment, and I think that Markel would grant me that.